lethal warfare is morally superior to non-lethal warfare. Now, before we get into our points of offensive and explain to you why this is the case, first I'm going to provide you a little bit of framing. So, for the sake of this round, imagine that you are country X. Right? Country X is an ordinary country, an ordinary region, an ordinary world with ordinary goals. Country X seeks the best opportunity for its people to advance themselves and to obtain self-actualization. Right? But country X is exceptional in one way. Country X only ever does anything deliberately, and country X never makes mistakes when it comes to its moral decision-making. Right? Country X also only wages just wars. Country X is not an aggressor nation, and country X can be seen as minimally just. Now, most of our analysis rests on the idea of just war theory, especially jus ad bellum. So jus ad bellum, justice before war, really centers around the idea of minimal justice. Minimal justice, a minimally just state, is a state which provides basic human rights for its people and doesn't violate the rights of other states. You have a right to defend against aggression. Therefore, country X, as a minimally just state, is waging a just war, defending against aggression. Now, how does this help us refute some of their arguments they give you? So first, they explain to you that they get less death. But on our side of the house, we will provide you a lot of analysis as to why deterrence and the incentive structure in our world actually deters war in general and leads to better outcomes overall for all people. Second is this notion of choice. They say that if you have a choice not to kill people, you ought not to. Now, while we would agree with that on face, we reject the notion that there is even a choice here. And it's the idea that it's a grave duty for the governments of countries to defend their people against aggression. And if it is your grave duty, then you really don't have a right to play around when other people's lives are at stake. You cannot sit up on your high horse and proclaim that there is a better way when you are dealing with the survival of your state and therefore the livelihood of your people. That is where your true duty lies.
To start off this debate, we're going to consider the practical side of the issue. Starting off with the question, what even is a non-lethal weapon? In our opinion, there really is no such thing. For example, the sticky foam that our opposition seems so fond of talking about could be used to shoot down an enemy's throat, thereby killing them. In fact, soldiers would even be incentivized to do so because they're desperate. They're trying to win. They're trying to survive. These so-called non-lethal weapons are actually lethal, and this can be applied to any non-lethal weapon. Essentially, this makes this entire debate a moot point. But continuing, another practical side of the issue is a resource advantage. So when enemies have the opportunity to use lethal weapons, country X is not going to choose to use non-lethal ones. It does not want to be at a disadvantage. It simply can't afford to risk its entire existence based on the trust that its enemy would use non-lethal weapons. Essentially, this boils down to a simple case of game theory, which helps two sides decide what their optimal strategy is. And game theory is resolved in many cases by a Nash equilibrium. In this case, the Nash equilibrium is for each side to use lethal weapons. Like I said, both sides simply cannot risk their existence based on trust for the other side.
Even if nobody died, we are arguing that war itself is terrible. Think about it. People lose their homes. Individuals and societies can't self-actualize. War itself is a terrible, terrible thing. And yes, now, death is a great part of that, but it's not the only part of that. In fact, death itself can be a deterrent to war. If nobody died in war, then states would have less of an incentive to avoid war and go to peace. States that have extremely large amounts of resources, in fact, would almost be incentivized to go to war over others because the resource conflict, they'd always win. And because they'd never lose a man, then they'd just keep on going at it. The consequences are so small that when you take death out of the equation, it almost makes war more inevitable. Even if we could perfect non-lethal weapons and make it so that they weren't capable of being used lethally at all, states themselves always have to have the power to do what they need to do to protect their people. As the Catechism of the Catholic Church states, legitimate defense can not only be a right, but a grave duty for one who is responsible for the lives of others. This makes it so that states have to be empowered to do whatever is necessary to protect their people, and their people's rights, and their rights to live as free individuals. They have to be able to prevent others from impinging on that. Additionally, This makes it so that it would be completely crazy and immoral to send soldiers out with non-lethal weapons against those with lethal ones. Imagine, as a commander, having to send out soldiers armed with dazzlers or spray foam against entire tank divisions and light infantry units. It would be insane. You'd be setting them up for failure every single time. This waste of lives would be so immoral and wasteful. It would pragmatically not work. It wouldn't work on principle. Additionally, they have argued that non-lethal weapons would be okay for use on, it would make use better for checkpoints, because if you accidentally sprayed some people with sticky foam, things wouldn't be so bad. We are arguing that the use of weapons against non-combatants in any situation is unlawful.
If people in Country X only use non-lethal weapons, wouldn't that further incentivize the opposing country to engage in war with Country X? In other words, if you knew that you would not die when you were to go to war with Country X, wouldn't you be more inclined to fight? One could assume continuous violence. Based on this line of thinking, is that not violating your third hallmark of movement towards peace and less violence?
If Country X vows to only use non-lethal weapons, what actions would a soldier of Country X take if their non-lethal weapons are no longer effective? For example, if Country Y creates glasses that make the Dazzler no longer effective, or if Country Y creates body armor that makes rubber bullets no longer effective.
Without the permanent possibility of death, the use of non-lethal weapons implies a more liberal use of harm-inflicting weapons. Doesn't that devalue life? Does the fact that you are causing more harm to a greater number of people become justified because you aren't taking lives?
And then, do you believe that it's morally acceptable to use non-lethal weapons against innocent people? For example, is it morally acceptable to blind a baby if they're an innocent baby?
How many times can someone be dazzled before they have permanent brain damage?
What's the testing process for the use of non-lethal weapons? How many times do they have to be tested? If somebody dies in the process of testing a non-lethal weapon, what happens then? How would you feel writing home to someone's mom after you sent them into battle, armed with nothing but a can of spray foam against a light infantry squad, and they died despite their protests that their fight was futile? Would you feel sound in that?
Are all non-lethal weapons morally superior to all lethal weapons?